My name is Deb Van Dynen. I'm an Associate Professor of English Education at Hope College, and I have the honor of being the NEA Big Read and Little Read Lakeshore Director. The NEA Big Read Lakeshore and Little Read Lakeshore programs are month-long community-wide reading programs focused on the reading of a common book. This year, because of COVID, we've switched to a mostly virtual program. We're excited for the possibilities that this presents us as we can expand our audience's scope and reach, as well as our ability to connect with speakers and experts that are beyond our geographical reach. Thank you for joining us this year as we explore Nathaniel Philbrick's In the Heart of the Sea and Marcia Diane Arnold's Galapagos Girl, Galapagos. We hope you enjoy these events and learn lots about the book's topics and themes, as well as issues and important questions in our world today.
Hi everyone, my name is Benjamin Kamphuis, and I have the privilege to talk to you about the book you guys read, The Galapagos Girl, and kind of some of the themes and things she went over in the book. It's a lot of science-based things that I'm really excited to teach you guys about. A couple of my credentials, I actually have a degree in marine biology, which is the study of saltwater organisms in the oceans. And I also have a master's in science in zoology, which is the study of animals. So this is a really cool thing for me to talk to you and teach you some things about. So I have a little presentation I want to show you guys, where we're going to talk about a couple things called adaptations and invasive species, which are a couple of things that the book addressed. So first off, we're going to talk about an adaptation. So a couple questions I have for you guys. What types of things change around us? So you can see right here, I have a picture of a sun, a picture of a snowman, and a picture of an apple. So that might give you some ideas of things I want to talk to you about. First off, one thing that changes around us is the weather. Some days it's rainy, some days it's sunny, some days it might have snow, and some days it might be wind. And especially in Michigan, our weather changes pretty quickly and all the time. Another thing that changes that we're blessed to have in Michigan are seasons. So summer, fall, winter, and spring. And as you know, each of these different seasons has different attributes to it, such as temperature, colder or warmer, and also rainier or sunnier. Another thing that changes for us is our food. So a lot of our food grows in the ground. And I don't know if you know this, but certain times of the year, certain foods are more prevalent or there's more of them. So blueberries, for example, and watermelons are really common during the summer months. And then things like apples are really common during the fall. So we have more of these foods at certain times of the year. Also, how do we deal with these types of changes or these things? For example, when the weather changes, where it gets cold or it gets rainy, you may put a coat on if it's cold, or you might get an umbrella out if it's rainy. We also change our clothing to fit the seasons. So for example, you wouldn't wear shorts in the winter because it's too cold. You normally wear shorts in the summer. And you don't normally wear a coat in the summer, you normally wear a coat in the winter. So we have clothing that kind of reflects what our season is. We also eat more of certain things during the year. So I don't know if you know this, but in my house, we eat more blueberries and watermelon in the summer, and in the fall, we eat more apples. They're still available throughout the year, but there's much, much more of them during certain times of the year. So how do animals and plants deal with these types of changes? Let's use an example. You all know what a bear is. What do bears do during the winter? Well, they hibernate, or they go in for a long sleep during the winter. What do squirrels do when it starts getting cold? They start gathering a whole bunch of nuts and other food into their homes. What do some trees do during the winter? So a lot of trees have leaves covering them. And does anyone know what happens to leaves during the fall? They shed their leaves or they fall to the ground and they become empty. The reason that a bear, a squirrel, and a tree deal with these things in the winter is there's not as much food available during the winter, and it's much more colder, and they need to use more energy to keep themselves alive. So they've adapted to deal with these types of things. So to understand an adaptation, we need to understand what a trait is. So a trait is something that an animal or a plant has, like hair or claws or sharp teeth, that makes them different from other things. So if we look at a duck and a crab, a duck has webbed feet and a beak and feathers and can fly, while a crab has claws and tiny legs and a hard shell. So they're very, very different because they live in even though they may live in similar environments, they survive in different ways. Or in other words, they've adapted. So an adaptation is a trait an animal or plant has to help it survive or reproduce. Reproduce means create new babies in its environment. They are heritable, which what that means is that the parents give it to their kids. So let's take a look at a lizard. So to the left, you guys can see that we have a patch of green leaves. And over on the right, I have a blue lizard. Do you guys think this blue lizard can hide well? So let's say it has a bird that wants to eat it. Do you think this lizard can hide well in these green leaves? I don't know about you, but I can see that lizard pretty good. Let's say the lizard has a different color that's a green similar to the leaves. It's much harder to see. You may be able to see it a little bit, but it's a lot harder to see than the blue one. That's an adaptation that a certain animal called a chameleon, who can change his skin color based off his environment, has adapted or changed its traits to allow it to survive. Let's look at a camel. So do you guys know where camels live? They live in the hot, hot, hot desert. How do they survive in the heat of the desert? I don't know if any of you have been in a desert, but I'm sure you've learned deserts are very hot, very dry. They don't have a lot of water, and they don't have a lot of food. So why would a camel want to live here? And how does it survive? What do you guys think? The hump. The hump is actually the way the camel survives. What do you guys think a camel's hump helps with? A lot of you may think it stores a lot of water in there that it can use for later. Well, that's not actually what it is. It's filled with fat. So this fat can be used later for food or water. So a camel will eat a lot, drink a lot of water when it's near a source like that. And then when it starts walking through the desert, it actually has a bigger hump. And over time, the hump will start to get smaller because the camel will metabolize or eat the fat that's there to give it water and food or energy. A lot of you know what a clownfish is because we've all seen Finding Nemo. And I have a big red fish up there. Who do you think eats who in this situation? You guys are right. The bigger fish eats the smaller fish. How does a clownfish who's really brightly colored, a bright orange, survive from being eaten from bigger fish? Anemones. So anemone is another type of organism. They've formed something called a symbiotic relationship where they benefit from one another, where a clownfish actually can swim into an anemone. The bigger fish can't, so it gets zapped by the anemone and swims away because it's irritating to it. While clownfish will do this cool thing where they'll go back and forth and keep diving in the anemone until their skin or their mucus can not get hurt by the stings of the anemone. So then it forms a relationship with it and can live and be protected by the anemone. So that way when our big fish tries to come eat it, it gets zapped and swims away and it doesn't want to eat the clownfish. So on the Galapagos Island, there's something called finches, which is a type of bird. So if you look at this cool picture I have here, you see a whole bunch of different birds, different colors, different beak sizes. Actually, 13 finches all came from one finch because of adaptations. There was a guy named Charles Darwin who researched these birds a lot on the Galapagos Islands, and saw that they were changing themselves over time. They all are very, very related to one another, but some of them noticed there were better ways to survive while others stayed the way they were. So now we have a whole bunch of different species or different kinds of finches. And what's different about each of these, you can see the colors and the beak sizes, and some of them even have the ability to drink blood, which is really weird, and some of them make tools or make things so they can break open nuts and other things. Another adaptation the Galapagos island has is the marine iguana, which you read about in the book. So that's a funny looking iguana. What types of things do you guys think that this iguana has that has allowed it to adapt and better survive on the Galapagos Islands? One thing is they can swim underwater for a long time in the ocean. They actually get a lot of their food in the ocean. They also have scales that can absorb a lot of sunlight because the iguana is not very good at keeping itself warm, and especially when it goes into the cold ocean, it gets even colder. So its scales allow it to absorb more sunlight and get warmer when it's done foraging in the ocean. They also have a gland or something inside of them that allows them to spit out salt from their food that they ate in the ocean. So if you look on the top left, you'll watch as this iguana is going to shoot out of its nose the salt. So that's a really cool thing because the salt, and especially in large amounts, is not very good for the iguana. So as you can imagine, when it's swimming through the ocean and eats things, it's probably drinking a lot of that ocean water. And for any of you who have tasted ocean water, it's very, very salty. So this gland inside of the marine iguana allows it to catch the salt and spit it out. And then the other three things, you can see this iguana swimming underwater where its tail and its hands are webbed or can move a lot like a fish to allow it to swim better and swim pretty fast. Are there any other adaptations you guys know of? Look around for new ones. Everything has adapted at some point. Even we have. I don't know if you noticed this, but when you guys are running or playing a lot, or you're outside on a hot day, you start sweating. Sweating is actually something that we've adapted to do to help to keep our body temperature at a healthier place. When you're noticing adaptations around us, and I want you to look around and notice all these different things, because everything is different out there. Why are these living things different from another living thing? A lot of these things are the adaptations they formed, and I think you guys should start asking your friends and family or learning from your teachers about these adaptations, and then teach them about new ones you found to your families and friends. Another area we're going to look at is invasive species. What does invasive mean? It means to intrude or go somewhere where you aren't supposed to be. So I have a little image of Angry Birds where you're shooting a bird into a tower where the bird really shouldn't be going, and it's intruding or being invasive to that area. So what is an invasive species? It's an organism or a living thing that causes harm or hurts something so in a new environment it isn't from. So let's look at something called a food chain. So I have a wolf, a sheep, and a plant. And this is going to help you guys better understand what an invasive species is. So in this case, the wolf, the sheep, and the plant are all from this environment. Does anyone know who eats who? Well, the wolf is a predator, and the sheep is a prey, and the wolf eats the sheep, and the sheep eats the plant. So in a normal environment, we have a food chain where we know who eats who, and there's a balance system within there. So for example, if we have a whole bunch of wolves born, what do you guys think happens to the sheep? If we have more wolves that are hunting and eating sheep, the sheep population will go down. And as the sheep population goes down, the number of plants that the sheep normally eats will probably go up. There's a lot more complicated things because we have a lot of different things eating different things, but I'm just trying to keep it simple for us all. And a lot of times when the number of wolves eat a lot of the sheep, eventually there aren't enough sheep for the wolves to eat. So we'll often see a lot of the wolves start to die off, which allows the sheep population to replenish or go back close to what it was before. And then eventually things will balance out. So environments work like this all the time. So let's go to this same environment. And let's say we introduce something that wasn't there before, such as a goat. So as you guys know, sheep and goats both eat plants. And a wolf might eat a goat too, but this goat is a lot faster, and he has horns that he might hit back at the wolf, while sheep is much slower and doesn't really defend itself well. So if you were a wolf, would you pick the slower animal, or would you pick the faster animal to eat? Wolves are most likely going to pick the thing that takes the least amount of energy to eat. So they may eat more of the sheep than they do the goats. And this might allow the goat to eat a lot more of the plants, because it is not as controlled as much. So while the goat eats more of the plants, we'll see the number of the plants go down quite a bit. And let's say this plant is the only thing the sheep eats. What do you think happens to the sheep if there's less plants for it to eat? It also goes down in population. And when there's less sheep to eat, what happens to the wolf? The wolf's population goes down too. So we have this goat who's really coming in an environment and taking over things that were normal for the wolf, sheep, and plant to eat. And it causes this imbalance and messes up the environment. And that's what an invasive species is. Now let's talk about invasive species and how they get into a new environment. So what types of ways do you guys think they get into a new environment? Sometimes they accidentally get in. So boats are a good example of that. So a boat sitting in one lake, let's say Lake Michigan, may sit there, and there may be a type of clam that lives in Lake Michigan. That clam could attach to the bottom of a boat, and then that boat may travel from, let's say, Lake Michigan to the other side of Michigan to Lake Huron, and this clam that lives in Lake Michigan may not be from Lake Huron. And a lot of times it can be accidentally brought from one environment to another. Another example is, let's say that you go on a trip to Utah. And in Utah, a bug hops onto your pants. You travel all the way back to Michigan, and you don't know that bug is still attached to your pants. And that bug may hop off once it's in Michigan and land into the environment and be accidentally released there. Sometimes they're released on purpose, too, invasive species. And humans are the main people that do that. So let's say someone brings in a pet. They buy a pet that's not from our area. And that pet gets released into the wild accidentally or maybe on purpose while it's being played with outside. And it starts reproducing and taking over an environment. There are some times where, and a lot of times there are other invasive species that humans feel if we release another invasive species that might be a predator for that species, it might balance things out, but a lot of times it doesn't. So there's a lot of things that humans do, whether it has good intentions to try to fix things or possibly bad intentions, and it causes even more damage to an environment. So some other examples of invasive species is a lionfish. So a lionfish is this really cool looking fish that's in the all over the oceans. And in the Caribbean specifically, the lionfish has become an invasive species that was released there. They're not sure if it was on accident or on purpose, but it has really taken over in there because the lionfish does not have a good predator that can help control its population. So they're starting to grow a lot more. They're eating a lot of the things that other fish would eat in the Caribbean, and so they're causing a big problem there. Zebra mussels are a really common thing in the Great Lakes. So these are a type of mussel that was not from the Great Lakes that got brought here most likely by a boat and have really taken over. So you can see they're the smaller little guys on top of this bigger mollusk. And they're just taking over because they're very, very fast at reproduction or producing more offspring. And they also eat very quickly because they have tiny little mouths. So they're really taking over and they're causing a lot of problems in the Great Lakes. Another problem you may have heard of are Asian carp. So they are these giant fish that you may remember that came up from the Mississippi River into Lake Michigan. They're still a problem as of today, and they're a very big fish that has not stopped growing. And because of that, they don't really have a predator, and they also eat a lot of the other fish that are in the Great Lakes. So they're actually hired people to go through the lakes and hunt for these Asian carp to get rid of them. There's a whole bunch of other things that have been trying to be used to kill off the Asian carp. Feral pigs are also a common thing. They may have been brought a long time ago by humans because they're an easy farm animal, and they escaped into the surrounding environment and started reproducing and causing a lot of problems in other countries. So in the Galapagos Island, there were some invasive species that were talked about. One are feral goats. So these are goats, kind of like the pigs we talked about, that were brought as farm animals, and they started spreading like crazy. So they got here by humans. What types of problems do you guys think they cause? We can kind of talk about my sheep and wolf example, except there aren't really wolves on the Galapagos Islands, but they eat a lot of plants that are native to the islands. And the problem is they actually have no predator at all. They have no one to eat them and control their population, so they continue to reproduce quite a bit and eat a lot of the plants that are there. Another example is a plant called the hill blackberry or raspberry. A lot of us have eaten raspberries or blackberries, and we kind of have an idea of what they are. How do you guys think they got here? Once again, humans. So they used them for farming. And what types of problems do they cause? Their growth takes over other plants. So they're kind of this viney type of thing that grows over top of other plants, takes away sunlight, takes away water and other nutrients that other plants would use, and grows like crazy on the Galapagos Islands, killing off other plants. Another crazy thing about them is their seeds can lay dormant, or in other words, can sit in the ground for a long time without growing, where you think that the blackberry or raspberry has been killed off, but actually it will start sprouting again in a couple years and start growing again. So it's a very, very hard thing to control now that it is in the Galapagos Islands. Another one are cats and rats. How do you guys think they got here? Humans again. Also boats a long time ago where rats would hide in the boats, and then they got out in the boats on the island. What types of problems do they cause? They eat a lot of the native species or animals that are on the Galapagos Islands. It's caused a couple of animals to become endangered where they are facing extinction or no longer being on the world at all. So these two are the Floriana mockingbird and the Galapagos racer, which is a little snake. So rats and cats are eating a lot of these animals, causing a lot of problems to the environment. Now that we've learned about invasive species, it's kind of a sad thing to talk about, but what do we do about it now? Because we, as humans, need to do more to help our Earth. One thing you can do is if you are going hiking or fishing, clean your gear, clean your clothes, clean your boots, clean anything that you're using on that hike or fishing, that just in case there's a bug or another plant that might have attached to you, to prevent it from spreading from one environment to another one, making it an invasive species that could really throw things off. Even the smallest of things that you don't think would cause damage can throw off a whole food chain in an environment. So it's very important that we keep things clean. Also, if you take your pets with you, like a dog, you want to check your pet's feet if it came from somewhere different to once again clean it to make sure there's no bugs or plants that got attached there. Also, if you have family or you have a garden yourself where you're growing plants, try to have plants that are native or from your environment to help prevent a not native plant that might look cool in your garden from spreading and killing off a lot of other plants that may be native. For those of you that have a boat, I don't have one, but if you have a boat, make sure that your family gets your boat clean before they move it from one body of water to another. If they're staying in if they're in Lake Michigan and they don't move from Lake Michigan, it should be okay. But if they take their boat out of Lake Michigan and bring it into an inland lake in the middle of Michigan, they could potentially spread an organism that's in Lake Michigan to another lake, causing that new environment to get messed up, or the other way around. So you want to make sure your boat is clean to help prevent that. The other thing about invasive species is learn more. Talk to your parents, friends, and or teachers about invasive species around you. You can tell them about the things you learned today and tell them about those invasive species and how they're messing up the Galapagos Islands. You also can start learning about other invasive species that are around us in Michigan. And as you learn about those, you can teach other people about them to make them be more careful so we don't cause more invasive species to get around. Also, learn about ways to help get rid of them. There are a whole bunch of scientists that have studied things to help get rid of invasive species that may know more about this than you do. You can either go a career focusing on the science of this and help with this. If you don't want to do that type of thing, a lot of these scientists need money to help control these things. And you may think, once again, is this really important to me? It is, because it can throw off Lake Michigan, which we all love. We don't want Lake Michigan to become a really bad place to go. Or there are forests and a whole bunch of other things out there that we like that we should help protect. And teach others. Invasive species are everywhere. You should teach everyone about the things that you're learning, because the more people know, the more they may want to change things. One other thing I want to talk about are ecosystems. So ecosystems have a lot of different, many living things that belong to the same environment, which is an ecosystem. We all interact, we all adapt. We're all trying to survive and make our world a better place. But sometimes something that's not from one environment may come to a new environment and throw that all off. So we want to make sure that we're protecting these ecosystems. It's important to learn about our ecosystem, the specific one you're in, and the changes that can happen with it. We need to protect it from problems like invasive species and pollution and a whole bunch of other things. But today I'm just talking to you about invasive species. So guys, thank you so much for talking to me about things today, and hopefully you learned something from the Galapagos Girl Book and a little bit about my teaching. If you guys have any questions, make sure you ask your teachers, and if they don't know the answer, they can reach out to people like me or other people in the community to learn more about these types of things. Thanks and have a great day, and remember, science is awesome.